Okay, hello everyone. How's it going? It's Settler's Lament is back again, and he once again forgot to mute the YouTube stream. One of these days I'll figure that out. But I'm joined here today by Dave, Auron MacIntyre, Mr. Patriarch. Speaking of which, Auron MacIntyre, I've never asked this. What does your name refer to? Is you're not name doxing, are you?
No, it's a mashup of different things. It's Auron. And it's a mashup of things. It's not anything specific.
Okay. But yeah. So today, I don't know. The topic seems pretty self-explanatory. Surviving Biden. What are we going to do for the next 4 years of this Democrat administration? I suppose it's still an open question whether it'll be 4 years of Biden, but it will at least be 4 years of Democrats, and probably a lot longer than that, but at least 4 years. So yeah, I mean that's a topic today. How does this affect us? What do we do? That type of stuff. Would anyone like to take it from me?
Well, I guess for myself, I've been kind of off of YouTube for a week or so because I've been traveling. But recently, I've just been thinking we need to radically rethink our approach to politics and really everything. I think that the right-wing movement as it stands right now is far too narrow and far too narrow. And I don't know. I mean, I think that for looking at the Biden administration, what we are looking at is a fundamental change in American politics that's just starting right now as we speak. And I think it's going to lead to an increasingly unstable country. But at the same time, the right wing is not in a position to build the kind of deep institutions that it needs to build. If I had, my druthers of things right now, I'd be telling people that we need to start meeting up in real life right now. But that's not going to happen until we de-lockdown, which, I have no idea when that's going to be. I always want to say, I kind of oscillate between paranoia and optimism on this, but, I don't know. We either need to think radically out of the box or we need to start meeting in real life and go deep, because the flash in the pan, social media type politics the right's been playing since 2014 have just not working for me. And now increasingly, I don't think they're working for anyone else. And I think that's kind of the conversation we're having right now.
No, I'd agree with that. I think it's served an interesting purpose. It's good for networking. It's good for meeting people. It's good for sort of, the people who are interested in ideas to sort of hone their own and whatnot. But I think you're fundamentally right in that, there needs to be some sort of real world tangible action that can be done. Otherwise, it's our situation remains academic, so to speak.
But just in terms of those two things, that's what I would have said last year is your position. But this year I'm like, well, I can't organize because I can't keep my own social media organized because I got banned off of several social medias.
Right.
I left another social media, Twitter, because it was psychologically unhealthy. And then, a lot of other people that were my compatriots on YouTube just got flat out banned in the last month, most notably Millennial Woes. And so, I don't know. What kind of conversation is social media going to have? I understand that eventually we're going to reconsolidate on one or two alternatives. But right now, I just have 20 bookmarks to various different alternative tech sites where I have a account, but I haven't set anything up yet. And as someone who has limited time, I'm just sitting here wondering how I need to have this organized. I need to have a direction. And until then, the online networking stuff, even for the sort of more minor purposes you listed, is really, for me, temporarily has become kind of a dead letter.
Yeah, I think we've seen, like I said, a lot of the culling of social media, and that's got a lot of people concerned. I think long term, you're right that, having these scattered platforms, of course we need to become as kind of anti-fragile as possible, and that means being able to reconstitute somewhere else if necessary. And there's also promising things like Odyssey which are harder and harder, and Gab and that kind of thing to shut down. The downside of those, of course, is they don't have a reach outside of your community, but it is good to have a safe place for your community and then maybe other places to go. So it might be a situation in which we're having to look at, making sure that we have these places that are more secure, even though they are more insular, but those don't become the only place we spend time, that there are avenues out to the wider world through things like YouTube, people who can still stay on those platforms and that kind of thing. And then you still always have that, kind of safety net in those places where people have learned that they need to go if they're unable to find their favorite creator, they get banned off of something, find out where they're going next. I think the other big thing is going to be, like you said, we're waiting to see what's going to happen with lockdowns and if that, changes anything. I think we have to start looking at both. I think we always are going to need a kind of online structure because everybody's so spread out and it's so hard to actually kind of consolidate people into one place, and then maybe it's not always wise. Like you've said a number of times, Dave, we need people in urban areas as well as in rural areas. We need to be able to impact multiple parts of the society and still maintain influences but also still be connected in a way that allows us to kind of come back together when people are getting pushed off of social media and that kind of thing. And so I think once we start figuring some of that stuff out, it is going to be a both and. But of course, the real world restrictions of the lockdowns are making the in-person part of that almost impossible in the near future.
That's a big thing for me. I mean, we haven't talked very much about Biden himself, but I'm not so sure how much that cerebral non-entity is even going to make an impact, right? It's almost like we're dealing with an environment more than we're dealing with an active agent. An environment
it's the spirit of Biden that we need to fear.
It's sort of like Sauron, right? It's just like this disembodied spirit that maybe he'll congeal into something that's more substantive after he obtains some artifact of great power, but right now not so much.
Well, I mean, I certainly would be afraid of him if I had an ice cream cone around him, but that's probably about it.
Or if you'd recently washed your hair, anything like that.
That too.
Yeah. If you're a sniffable Zoomer, then Mr. Scratch and Sniff might be a threat to you. But I guess the thing is that we're dealing with an environment that we don't. We're still trying to feel out here. The organizational element is huge. And I think that I just, maybe this is just me, but I can't figure out a way to build from online and then go off. We got to start offline and then go on slowly. Like that to me, that's the solution. And that's the direction that I've learned in my personal life from repeated error. And I don't want to end the conversation, but I'm just thinking out loud as I go through this stuff.
Yeah, no, that's I think maybe you may be right there. Like I said, online is a tool, but it's absolutely not the end goal. So like what you're saying, you make your contacts, and we already have the contacts now. Let's just start organizing in the real world. And one of the interesting things about where I live is in South Africa is I think you see sort of the model of what we need to do going forward. There's an organization here which is called Afro Forum. I know Auron's heard of them at least because he's interviewed sort of an acquaintance of mine down here, Aaron van Sale. And what they are is they're a kind of a civil rights organization which has a membership of 250,000 paying members. And they basically are involved in lawfare. They're involved in security. They're involved in sort of bootstrapping different operations and whatnot for the specific community members, and preserving predominantly Afrikaner or colored heritage in South Africa. Now, the thing that helps them, of course, is that they have not universally, but predominantly sort of an ethnic component, which helps them sort of stick together and congeal. And, I don't think we necessarily have that, and that might be a problem, but it might not have to be that, right? So you could have like a, trad cath Afro Forum of California, essentially. Something along those lines. But what ended up happening is, as you say, that these things didn't start online. So they were originally trade union movement, and they sort of reformed themselves, got out of bankruptcy, and then used that to sort of bootstrap Afro Forum. So yeah, that's the thing. You need to the online thing, I think, may be a little overrated, and organizing these sort of our own parallel structures to agitate on our behalf, or at the very least try and carve off our own little piece of the pie is, I think, probably all we can hope to do.
Yeah, everybody moving to the Republic of Dave. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think that one of the things that's probably going to happen is that a lot of this a lot of what we're talking about just, it's going to feel there's a bit of pressure.
You're roboting pretty badly.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. Is that any better?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. I think a lot of this is only going to move forward kind of when it has to. Like Patriarch was saying, I've talked to a number of guys from South Africa along these lines, and Don the Pleb and I were having a discussion about this as well. And in many ways, South Africa's ahead of us because they've had to be, right? Like, the realities on the ground just meant that people there couldn't lie to themselves anymore, and they had to start doing the things that we're talking about. And I think in many ways that's going to be true, in the US and Canada and other places as well, until things really get to the point where the average person can feel the things we've seen kind of coming down the pipe, until they can feel them breathing on their necks. It's just they're not going to make the moves necessary. And in many ways, while we are doing, I think, something, valuable in talking about the theory and understanding what needs to be done and exploring these ideas, it's not really these big moves are not going to be made until there's a wider understanding inside kind of more organic communities about what's happening. And when that happens, I think then you might start to see some of these more natural communities start moving in the directions we're talking about, hopefully with the help of some of the people who have heard kind of what we're discussing.
I'm not pushing back on this exactly, but we really need to dig down on this organic community thing, because I think it's not that it's not what you said was inaccurate, but the devil really is in the details here. It's if you don't mind me going through the components of this organic community. So the first one is the good old fashioned American tightly knit community with the church and the local hardware store. That's dead, right? Or that's dying. In every year, that's become weaker and weaker. And in 2020 and 21, every month that has become weaker and weaker. So what we have, it seems, when we talk about organic contingencies in this country, are various different political and demographic groups that are milling about, trying to find some way to express their dissatisfaction with how the country is being managed. Currently, the demographic groups that ally with the right are, how can I put this lightly?
Not allowed to use that organizing principle?
Well, they're not allowed to use that organizing principle. They're also not particularly high value groups in terms of activist energy. We're talking about, when you were just saying organic groups, if we just put aside the whole mythological American middle class town that is wasting away before our very eyes for a second, the group that immediately came to my mind was boomers. By the time boomers wake up, they're going to be too old to do anything. And they're going to be too risk averse to take any real risks. And to the extent that they do want to take real risks, they're going to be trying and I don't know how we avoid this, they're going to be throwing their money at bringing back a world that can't possibly exist again, right? There's a chance we could have saved America in the way that Ronald Reagan and Eisenhower imagined it. I'm pretty sure that chance evaporated in 2012, certainly in 2020. Anything else that we have going forward is going to be a radical deviation from that. That's not going to feel comfortable for older people. So to this purpose, the whole boomer demographic, which is the majority of people that we talk about red pilling, that's of limited utility for an organization that wants radical change. And if we're honest, we want radical change. So the only other demographic groups we have to appeal to are groups that are going to be coming one way or the other from the left. Because I think that, we need some kind of an elite appeal group. And I don't see how that's going to develop without dragging people people who would be like Angela Nagel from the left to some vision that we have for them that's not on the left. This is a phrase that Curtis Yarvin obviously is now fond of using, but people before him, like Amy Therese, were using it. Post-left is something that I think that any organized counter coalition to our current insanity is not going to consider itself right, but post-left. I think there's a lot of space to work inside of that, but it's just going to require a radical rethinking, because there's not going to be an organic wake up that's worth having, in my opinion. But feel free to push back on that.
Yeah, so I think obviously I talked to Amy Therese. I had her on my channel, and I think that there is certainly value in having those discussions. I'm trying to make connections more in that community and reach out to more of those people. But every time I have a conversation with that crowd, the answers are, we both realize the problem. We both understand that there may be parts of the, kind of the structure is not working, kind of the liberal, the remnants of liberal civilization are not functioning properly. I don't think there are people inside that community, people like Angela Nagel, who I think probably would be able to find common ground. I don't know that Amy would. I don't know that people, the true dyed-in-the-wool Marxists, the ones that simply cannot break out of the kind of the class consciousness thing, I don't know that they will, because every time I try to have a conversation along those lines, it's very clear that it's like, oh yeah, no, we're fine to agree with you that this is a problem, but we're never going to step anywhere near your coalition when it comes to actually solving them, because we fundamentally disagree about human nature. And that is a bridge that just seems uncrossable for them.
Yeah, I would agree with this. I mean, sort of in my present location, as bad as things are and whatnot, you still have all these, progressive minded, white dudes living in Constantia and Rondebosch and places like that. And they won't believe it until Julius Malema puts them on a plane and tells them to leave the country and takes their house, essentially. So I think there's the sort of not the passively leftist people, right? The kind who are just sort of, hey, whatever, man, I'm sort of apolitical. This is just sort of the environment talking. I think those guys can be won over, but the actual dedicated leftists, I see that as kind of a lost cause.
Yeah, Auron's talking about a very interesting middle case, because these people are dedicated leftists, but they're also in some ways canceled leftists.
Yeah. So the key here that I'm pointing to is actually, I think we're actually worse off chiseling off disaffected liberals, because they still want to keep liberalism and they don't understand the fatal flaw. And so what they're really looking for when you're looking at the guys like Dave Rubin or whatever, they're just looking to be Democrats from the 90s. And they can't be Democrats from the 90s on the left anymore. And now the GOP are Democrats from the 90s or further to the left of them. And so it's more of a safe home for them. That's actually not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is specifically the people who really do fundamentally understand that there is a completely to this, and
you're roboting again.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, hold on. Is that any better?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Were you able to hear what I said before?
Yeah, mostly.
Okay. So there is a lot of value in talking to the people who do understand that it's not just, oh, we lost some of our, people are being canceled now, and oh, there's not freedom of speech, and we have to get back to the place where we have the open marketplace of ideas. I don't think there is actually a lot of ground to be won there, or at least that's a longer road to hoe. I think there is some value in talking to people who do understand there's a fundamental break. There's fundamentally something wrong with the underpinning of the current system. But I think they fall into two categories. Both of them are going to be canceled because they've been pushed outside of kind of the neoliberal world. They're not on board with the woke agenda and that kind of thing. But I think there is a camp like Angela Nagel who really is in. They see, from at least from what I've heard of her, they see a problem with what's happened to the social fabric, and they understand that we need traditional family structures and religious structures, even if they don't, personally believe in, in God or something. They understand the value of them, and they understand that the breaking and tearing away of those was a fundamental problem with society. And then there are the truly dedicated, just Marxists who there is nothing else. Yes, they'll agree with that the system is broken, but there's no way they're crossing the bridge to going back to a system they believe is fundamentally, going to continue to not lead us towards the Marxist utopia. So I do think there are people there who are valuable to talk to and try to build bridges with, but I just wouldn't go over there expecting everybody. I've had conversations with multiple different types of people in this post-leftist area, and I've seen two very different results depending on where they see the problem. And if the problem is that is kind of the rending of the social fabric and meaning, then there's some progress to be made. And if the problem is just capitalism, or we're not moving towards the dialectic or whatever, like if they're just steeped in that, then it's an entirely different kind of conversation, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and obviously, some Marxists have kind of tragically robotic responses to new situations that, strangely enough, is not something I see for most reactionaries. I guess when I look at someone like Amy Therese, and I agree, she's no Angela Nagel, the promise I see is somebody who can process stories outside what both you and I are in, and I think we got this both from Yarvin, called the single story state. A lot of the challenges that we're going to face as a movement, and I know this sounds hopelessly abstract, but a lot of challenges that we have as a movement are going to be publicly telling a story about ourselves or about something that's happened, or for artists, perhaps about some fictional imagining. Most of our political activity is going to be telling stories that do not conform to the predefined set of assumptions and the predefined set of who the good people are and who the bad people are that the left wants to tell. As long as somebody can hear a story like that and not basically fall into the prescribed reactions, then we have somebody who, like it or not, is going to be an ally. And to make this as little as, I guess this is still political, but just to minimize the political element of this, we can look at something like the coronavirus lockdowns. What I've noticed here is just how hard it is to have any kind of conversation about something. I mean, I thought that this was like, when I thought, obviously I live in a highly progressive area, and most people I know are dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You guys know the story. And, I understood that in October, September of 2020, I couldn't have a conversation with them over, okay, I think our reaction to coronavirus is ineffective and it's not getting the results other countries have, and it's At the same time, it just looks insane. And I'm like, okay, but then Biden got elected, and then we got a vaccine, and I'm like, okay, well, now I can have a conversation. Nope, absolutely not. It's the exact same reaction. And so what I'm looking for, and that's because they can't process a story. The people who I'm trying to have this conversation with can't process a story outside of the story that they're hearing from CNN. And so, what I'm talking about here, what I'm looking for in a coalition member is just people who can process stories as simple as, hey, can you imagine a world where this coronavirus thing has been fundamentally mishandled? And it's not the fault of randos who don't wear their mask properly, or who question the lockdown. Like, can we imagine that? And if the answer is yes, then I think we're starting something, that will eventually become the post-left.
Yeah, I think there's certainly, they're more valuable to be hot or cold rather than lukewarm, right? And it's the people who are comfortable inside the system and comfortable with the current story, which are probably least likely to actually make the big break. And so I think you're absolutely right in that sense, that it is valuable to try to recruit or at least form alliances with people who are able to operate outside of the narrative, even if they came to that position from a different direction. So I'm absolutely not disagreeing with that at all. I do think there are limitations, but that's okay. Like you build the bridges where you can and you move on where you can. There's no, I think as long as you're not willing, you're not trying to meet someone, you're not compromising your principles to try to have that conversation. I think it's a good and productive thing to have it. I still think that it's going to require more, how do I say this? I think it's going to require if we want to see the average person, not the average person, but if we want to see more people move towards the level of organization I think that you're talking about, especially in real life, I think it's going to come as, again, I think people start feeling the kind of the pain, and it starts getting harder and harder to, in general, believe the story. And don't get me wrong, like the vast majority of people still will. I'm not looking for the mass wake up of people here. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think I think Yarvin just had a new essay come out, and he was talking about, he's kind of pointing to his highly controversial point that a Biden presidency was actually going to be better. And it's basically kind of what I always assumed it was, is purely an accelerationist thing. He was basically, the faster.
He never used that word, but it was.
Of course. It's exactly what it was. He said, look, the Trump stopped rot of the and that it could actually look competent, semi-competent at fighting. And as soon as he's gone and Biden is in power, then there's nothing to stop the system from decaying. I mean, the institutions are currently trying to say that 2 + 2 = 5. And a Biden returning to office simply accelerates the speed at which 2 + 2 is officially 5. And that's just collapse. That just means collapse eventually. That which can't go on forever will not. And that was really, basically what he was saying with the Biden thing is, look, I know everybody, would have preferred Trump. There are things that I obviously prefer Trump in most ways in a policy situation, that kind of thing. But Trump wasn't affecting policy. He was at best applying the brakes to the worst aspects of these people. And that sounds good for, people who want to buy an extra year or two, I guess. And I understand that impulse. I really do. But at the same time, you got to understand that there is a value to a system that cannot contain itself, kind of contain its degeneration, simply moving further down the path to which it kind of falls apart. And so I think some of that will come as we get closer and closer to that. And I think a Biden presidency probably will hurry us down the line. Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, in the end, it really doesn't matter, because that's not really a choice we got to make, as the election has been more fortified. So the idea that there was really a decision in the end probably wasn't the case in either way.
Thank you so much, Time Magazine, for giving me that word, fortified. That is the greatest gift 2021 has bestowed upon me, is the word fortification. I'm in love with it.
Yes, it's tremendous. Kind of from my own vantage point, to sort of push this conversation maybe a little bit of a different direction, it would seem to me that the only real way to go forward is, just do our own thing, and then if people want to participate, sort of the moderates want to give us their money because they believe what we're doing, fine. But ultimately, there's got to be sort of action, sort of on our part, right? So because coalitions can be beneficial, but I think what we definitely don't want to do is try to find people who are opposed to our ideas to sort of become our partners from the get-go, if that sort of makes sense. So yeah, eventually, kind of a build it and they will come sort of situation. So if we do offer something, as Dave was saying earlier, sort of a story, something that they can believe in, and it's compelling to, true human nature, and they accept it and they sort of see the light, they can very, very likely come on board and be part of the program. But I think what has to happen first is we got to sort of take our own first steps. And I just guess sort of the big question is, what should that first big step be? What should that first organization be? What are the goals that we are trying to achieve, materially speaking? What is it we want to build and see spread and influence the wider society? And that's the $1 million question.
Yeah, we got one super chat, which is kind of relevant to this conversation, so I'll read it now. For $5, since the culture is so stacked against us and the left holds the high ground, is this a century-long project? I mean, yeah, I guess we don't really have a century to, things will get a lot worse.
It's a forever long project.
Yes.
This is. We are in the business of holding back entropy. We are in the business of building things. Like, this never ends, right? If you're saying how long we have to worry about the left, you're asking the expiration date on the left rather than when our job is going to be done and we can go back to slacking off, I guess. The expiration date on the left is 100% up to the left. But if the left dies, there will be another enemy on the horizon.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to defeat the left anytime soon. I don't have much optimism that much of this will really result in anything. It's certainly, I would be very surprised if there was any sort of fundamental dethroning of the left within any of our lifetimes.
So there's and I'm going to butcher it. I wish I had the passage at hand, but there's a great. I'm deep. I've been pretty deep in Spangler recently, Oswald Spangler, and there's he talks a lot, of course, about the civilizational cycle, and he really talks about how as you get into that late civilization stage, and everybody just becomes focused on rationality and reason. And they become unable to kind of act out the kind of the animating spirit of their civilization. There's a period where the only thing left to do is kind of keep the ember burning until the next animating spirit comes and blows on it and kind of brings it back. Like, at some point, the forces of what we're talking about are just going to wear it down to the point where the best thing you can do is kind of shelter and value those things. And men of character, the only thing they're going to be able to do is keep those values and keep that spirit, so that when the next generation, who is exhausted and drops kind of this whole facade and drops this whole regime, decides to pick up the banner, they have something to pick up. And I think we're very squarely in that phase. I think it's very clear that we're kind of in that portion of the civilization. And so when you say, is it a 100-year project? If we're lucky, I think that we need to understand that.
I might disagree though. And, I know you've read more deeply into Spengler than I have. I think I read just a little portion of Decline and Fall, but I know he mentions this, but I am somebody who I don't want to present myself as like a scholar or something like that, but I've been interested more recently in sort of Dark Age literature, e.g. Augustine, e.g. Boethius, and I know Spengler does mention this at some point. I mean, like, look at the Merovingians, who coincidentally employed Boethius, even though he was Roman. These people were barbarians by any legitimate description of them. But I wouldn't describe the work done by the Merovingians or by Boethius or by Augustine as simply keeping the embers alive on Rome. They were building something, but it wasn't something that would be understood as progress by any of the people who came before them, if that makes sense. And this is the thing. I think it is one of my adages to always be building, always be building, always be building, always be building. But I think the thing is not, we're going to stop building and keep the embers alive. I think that's not the message. I think the message is open your mind to the fact that building takes more forms than you would have thought in your previous decadent state. So, for instance, have anyone seen that Akira Kurosawa movie, Ikiru?
No.
I hope I'm not mispronouncing it. I believe it's about this businessman who builds this business empire and this ideal Japanese family, and he's diagnosed with cancer. And this is sort of a classic film, black and white. I think it's from the 50s. And he slowly realizes that this business empire he created is just a meaningless bureaucracy that doesn't build anything lasting. And then he realizes that this ideal Japanese family, like his wife doesn't love him, his kids don't like him very much. His whole life has been a sham. And so he has to go to his death realizing that he hasn't built anything. But before he dies, he realizes, it's been a long since I've seen the movie. He realizes that at one point, like, he dedicated some money to charity and they built like this tiny playground with a swing set. But that tiny playground with a swing set is like, that gives him joy. Like that was enough for his life to have meaning, right? Like that little thing, it was enough. It wasn't enough to be like an empire or to save his civilization. But it was enough to say that my life added more good to the world than evil, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the way that it's very Zen, right? It's also very Augustinian. And I wonder if that is not the attitude we have to develop. We're never going to be as big as our enemies are in our lifetimes. But that does not mean that we can't build things that, are essential in a historical sense.
Yeah, I don't know that. I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but I don't think we're disagreeing heavily, Dave. I just think maybe we're using different terminology there. But
sure. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I didn't mean to imply that we had a big disagreement. All I'm saying is to avoid the sort of the conservative image of standing athwart the history, tracks of history, and yelling "stop!" Right. In case our audience thinks that is what Spengler meant, right? Because I think Spengler himself speaks about the Merovingians, right, as being this, this sort of transitional phase. As a matter of fact, I think that Merovingian as an adjective comes from Spengler, although I haven't read that far in him.
No, I think what he's saying, and maybe Ember was the wrong way. Like I said, I wish I had the quote right in front of me because it's particularly good. But it really is that spirit of, look, you need to build like you said, you need to build these things that will then, when society is ready to move in that direction, will make this available to people. Will make will kind of the ground will be laid, and those things will be forwarded into the future. And so it's not, like you said, it's not the conservative like stand athwart history and try to stop, so much as you need to be building and continuing things in a way that will allow that when the time is right, and the kind of the next phase moves forward. But anyway,
no, I think that's very very apt. I was listening to Dave describe this movie, and it sounds almost like a Japanese Death of Ivan Ilyich almost. Sounds really. What was the name of that? I was just curious.
Actually, it's literally it's Ikiru to Live. It literally was inspired by the Death of Ivan Ilyich. It was the director read the Death of Ivan Ilyich and said, I want to do this, but in a Japanese context.
Okay, interesting. Oh, cool. I'll check that out later.
Akira Kurosawa's first movie that put him on the map was a Japanese adaptation of Dostoevsky's The Idiot. I'm sorry, I'm going off track. Please continue. He was really into Russian literature, as you might imagine.
No. So Ikiru to Live. All right, cool.
No, it's a classic. It's a classic.
I was just looking at the spelling here in the chat. I want to make sure I wrote it correctly. But no, I think Lambda wrote something here in the chat, which I think is very appropriate. And he was mentioning that perhaps the only hope for political change is spiritual revival or renewal. Yeah, personally, I would agree with that. I think, and this is sort of going back to what you were talking about with that Ikiru movie. It's being, of course, politics affects all of us, right? We all got to sort of deal with, the goings on in Washington and whatnot, and even our own local level. But if we are concerned about building things that last, meaning building families, raising them right, trying to, preserve your little community as best you can, things of that nature, I think that's really the only way we're going to be able to, perpetuate ourselves into the future. Because, in a certain sense, the future, in a literal sense, the future belongs to those who sort of show up for it. And sort of by prioritizing, these sort of perennial things, family life, faith, community, that is, I think, ultimately what's going to save us. Because even when the collapse does come, we're still going to have those things, right? I mean, when Rome fell, or when Rhodesia turned into Zimbabwe and became a shithole, these fundamental essences didn't go away. Now, of course, we have to deal strategically with some of these bigger problems and trying to hopefully avoid or minimize the collapse to a certain extent, right? But I think our problem essentially is a spiritual one primarily, and if we're able to sort of master the spirit and be sort of an inspiration in a proper sense, right? Sort of not sort of trying to placate everybody in this sort of skeevy sort of stuff that you see on, social media, whatever, but real proper, trying to that sort of proper old school Christian is the only way I could put it. That sort of being those sorts of characters who we know about all these centuries later, right? Sort of the paradox of trying to create a modern day saint, because those people are out there, but we just probably don't know who they are, and trying to sort of elevate whatever that is, I think, has to be a priority.
No, I absolutely agree. I'm a huge political theory nerd, but our problems are not root political. And this is always what, someone who I really respect, like Yarvin, is kind of always missing from his work. It's like, yeah, the king, CEO's, king's basically a CEO. No, it's not at all. Like it's an entirely different thing. It possesses a spirit of the people, and we don't have that right now. It's ailing. And until you have people who have had a big change in the way they see things spiritually, I don't think rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic is going to matter that much. There is a proper way to do politics, and it's important to understand how they work, understand the mechanics and all those things. But at the end of the day, this is not primarily a problem of ordering of, formal powers of government. That is not what's going to win this in the end, which is why I think we so often talk about building things outside of the formal political structure. We're talking about, having impact on culture, having impact, building families, building, organizations that aren't really overtly political, because I don't think that's where the change is going to happen. I think the system is specifically designed to resist it. And even if we could get exactly the political changes we wanted over in a short amount of time, I don't know that fixes the problem. That don't get me wrong, properly ordered politics will drive many parts of culture, and so there's certainly a big value in that. But the current that is not currently available, and so I think that making sure that we understand that the situation and the changes in the building is not going to be along primarily traditional political lines is something we need to understand.
Yeah, we got a couple other super chats. Sam153 for $10. Not that it matters in a sense because of institutional control, but what is the most what's this word? What's the worst legislation that Congress will likely pass this session? I don't know. Any ideas, guys? Legislative news is so boring.
Yeah, the only one I know of that was a real sort of eye catcher was the House passed legislation which would basically federalize voting and get rid of the requirements for ID, universalized mailing ballots, and all that sort of stuff. The only problem with that, of course, is it still needs to pass the Senate, and I don't see how that isn't unconstitutional. But we'll see. Like I too am sort of checked out of run-of-the-mill politics as well.
Yeah. I do remember hearing that's supposed to be shot down in the Senate, but I don't know if that's true or not.
The legislator will move this session to try to make it so that religious liberty protections are a dead letter. We've already seen moves against the Hyde Amendment. Once more, I do not follow this closely, but I would suspect that would be a huge attack that's going to come down the line this administration.
Yeah, I wouldn't assume that any kind of neutral protections are going to exist. I would assume that any kind of attempt, anything that is sheltering the ability of religious people or institutions that disagree with progressives to continue to operate, if they even really exist. I mean, what does unconstitutional mean at this point? How long can you lock people in their homes? What part of that is constitutional? I don't even know. At this point, I just kind of expect all that stuff to continue to just collapse. It's basically collapsed already. I would expect it to continue at pace.
I would say that the upside will be we'd no longer have to see progressives whine about freedom of movement, but that's not true. They'll whine about freedom of movement being disrespected by a border wall locked inside their own houses.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's some value to this. My buddy and I know Dave has been on Good Old Boys podcast and stuff too, so he's familiar with bog beef.
Yeah.
But bog beef's big thing is just formalize it all. Just make it clear who's oppressed, who's in charge. And I know that's not to their advantage, so they're not going to do that. But the closer we get to that, honestly, the better. It's all de facto happened anyway at this point. So now we're just splitting, we're splitting legal hairs. The more it becomes just official and formal and clear, the more people can just actually understand it.
Yep. I don't know. I mean, getting rid of religious liberty. I mean, to a certain extent, that's true. But California just a couple years ago tried to get rid of the seal of confession, and they ended up having to back off of that. So I'm sure they'll erode it, but I don't think even at this stage that's one of the few things that they would get a major organized backlash for. I'm not sure if it's something they really have the ability to completely destroy.
No, you're probably right. It's probably a slower erosion than the others, but it's still probably coming down eventually.
But another one, this one's for you, Dave, mostly. Charlemagne, partnership with leftists or post-leftists looks to me like noticing that the bank robber is very efficient at moving materials with his van, so you hire him to help move the furniture. Do you have anything to say?
Yeah, sorry, I had my mute on. I was laughing. I'm never going to live this down. Well...
I don't know if you've been watching the chat, but Charlemagne has been quite quite against your takes today.
Well, I that's fine. That's fine. Charlemagne's a good guy. He's trying to keep me honest. Well, I mean, there's two reasons why you want to maintain dialogue with the left. The first reason, and it's not because, I mean, if we're honest, like, I think that there is a line developing in the left between the Angela Nagels and who will become right wing at some point, and maybe the Amy Teresa's, maybe the line's a little bit further out. If you take my impression over Auron's. But at any rate, past the Angela Nagel horizon, it could be like the event horizon for leftism, right? Once you get past the Angela Nagel horizon, you're not going to get many converts. But that's almost besides the point. The reason why you always reach out to leftists is because reaching out to leftists helps keep you strong. It helps keep your mental faculties exercised. I had a conversation with a leftist a few days ago, and a lot of people criticized me for that because it was kind of a train wreck. But it was fun. The other reason why is because, and this is what a lot of people don't realize, the conversation isn't always about the conversation. A lot of it's about the optics of having the conversation. As long as you're polite and receptive to the left, the narrative of the right winger becomes harder and harder to sell. And it also puts you into a defensive position, which is one that the left fundamentally does not know how to react to. So this having, not necessarily telling the story, but being part of a story that itself contradicts the narrative that the left is trying to tell, actually manifestly helps the right-wing position grow and become more obvious, and it actively decays the left-wing perspective on the world, so that if for nothing else, there's sort of this Christian utility of turn the other cheek. It forces the opponent, and I don't want to be like Justin Trudeau, like if you kill your enemies, they win, or something like that. But Jesus is not Justin Trudeau, and there's wisdom in turn the other cheek. And that is because your life constructs your own moral narrative just as much as your words do. And that means that engaging with the left gives you an opportunity to participate in a narrative that's fundamentally opposed to what the left is saying at a macrocosmic level. And that's why I consider it to be valuable, even though, past a certain limit, I'm not expecting any converts.
So one of the things that might be helpful here is to bring in a little Carl Schmitt, right? Like, so what we're looking for is to expand the friendly coalition. And we want in the friendly coalition, the key is going to be that they but don't pose existential threats to the narrative of the friendly coalition.
Mhm.
So if you can secure people in the left, because I think this is there's a fundamental problem, of course, with kind of the neoconservative understand. I think I'm not going to get a lot of pushback from that. There's a fundamental problem with the neoconservative
I don't know,
construct.
man. I hear Charlemagne disagrees with everyone's take.
That's
in the
right.
chat.
Yeah. Charlemagne, jump in and defend the neocons, please.
Yeah.
Give it your best shot.
I want to see George W. Bush be defended here. Let's go.
But I think there is a serious.
You know, actually, ironically, I used to be a very fervent defender of the Iraq War.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
That was a long time ago.
I voted for Barack Obama, so I am not one to judge.
But yeah. So what I was saying was, I think there is a fundamental problem in our society with the economic ordering of things. And I think one of the things that kind of reactionaries need to bring to the table is the argument that, look, we have to build an economy that is structured around family and family organization and the furthering of the betterment of our culture, and that means prioritizing those things. And if that means that the economy has to take a hit in a certain area, or we have to reorganize our priorities. And for the people on the left for which that is a message that works, that is when we can make part of the friend coalition. For people for whom that is all they were ever looking for was, and they can start moving towards kind of the social conservatism, because once the economic barriers kind of fall down, they can start saying, okay, well, if your focus is the good of the family, then that means certain economic things, and then I can start taking your assertions that this should be the kind of the core organizing principle seriously, and then you can start to build that coalition. For the people for whom that's not available, and it's just, look, it's Marx or nothing, then yeah, I don't. They're always going to pose an existential threat to the friendly coalition, because we simply cannot ally with that understanding. But for the people who are willing to understand, like, we can reorder some of the economic issues to be more family focused and more beneficial to the society broadly without becoming communists, then I think you've got some ground you can actually build on.
I suppose moving on to another super chat. This is the last one. Kia Mokita for $11. I gave more. This is in reference to him asking me to ban Charlemagne. And I said that he donated $10, so why would I ban him? Though joke's on you, Kia, because Charlemagne also donates $1 a month to my Subscribe Star, and he's super chatted before, so I'm pretty sure he's donated more than you have in total.
Nice.
But so where are we then?
Well, I guess I could comment. I mean, I'm not trying to. I mean, I grew up with Auron in so much. These pushbacks are really just sort of caveats that I'm sure he's thought of, right? The problem with the sort of what Auron described just now was sort of like a Buchananite coalition, if I would put it that way. The difficulty is that in modern America, the Buchananite coalition is incredibly weak. It's just, unfortunately, it consists mainly of the people who are, to borrow Charlemagne's word, getting BTFO'd from all sides. Rural, blue-collar people who have to spend more. And I understand that this is sort of a function of the age we live in, and I understand that I'm part of this. When I look at people like myself, I'm just thinking, I've got a job, I've got I've got these debts to pay, I've got a kid, and my life is, I have to live my life, right? And then on top of that, like, I'm going to be a dissident. That's a hard road to pull. If you're a dissident and you live a life like one of the bread tubers like Vosh or ContraPoints or Philosophy Tube, even if they didn't have the backing of the mainstream, I don't know if Vosh does. Certainly ContraPoints and PhilosophyTube do. Even if they didn't have the backing of the mainstream, their lifestyles work into this activism so much more effectively. So the thing that we have to overcome is that we don't really have an activist class, and I'm not so sure that, I think broadening the coalition to include populist economics is all good, but I don't know. I don't think that it answers the fundamental question of how we get a funded activist class.
Yeah, well, I mean, are we going to be allowed to have that, right? Like, that's the question. Are we behind the eight ball? Yeah, absolutely. Are we going to have to outwork and out-hustle literally every person who's progressive because they have it on easy street? Yeah, 100%. Are people who should be like running university departments or selling, writing big op-eds or big columns of the New York Times, are they going to be doing stuff that's, not as, that doesn't earn them as much money and isn't as cushy because they disagree with the regime? Yeah, but like, when is that not true, right? Like, how do you make that not true if you're out of power and the people in power are never going to let you near it willingly, right?
No, I think that's the road we have to hoe. But what we're describing essentially is a predicament that does not yet have a solution, because we will need to fight this battle. But the battle will be won when, in the course of fighting it, we discover some way to elevate an activist class, or to make activism work for the class of people that we're talking about, who we are and who we're defending. And yeah. I don't have a solution for that yet, but I'm just saying that this is needs a solution at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's the elite theory says that at some point you need someone who's disaffected enough to pick up a power base of people who've been disenfranchised. And you're right that the people who we're talking about in a coalition we're talking about are necessarily powerless, but this is always how that starts, right? Like, if you had a coalition of the powerful, you would be on the left. That's what the left is. It's a mystery cult of power. It's only held together because it's the people who are able to maintain power. So by necessity, everyone who's going to rise against it will be out of power until they disenfranchise enough people who are kind of in that upper tier, who will then pick up and run with those that they've pushed out, right? That's kind of the general thrust of elite theory.
No, I agree. I'm just trying to, I can imagine scenarios about how that arises, but they seem a little far away at this stage, right?
No, absolutely.
It's hard to imagine because, like, I just told this to my wife, like, I have a hard time imagining the future. And it's not because I see apocalypse imminent. I actually don't see apocalypse imminent, but I know a few things have to be true. The left's ideas are insane, and they'll blow up in everyone's face the second we try them. The center won't hold because it's obviously corrupt, and the Democrats basically just fired their opposition party in any meaningful way in January. And so the center won't hold. And in the meantime, the entire apparatus of the mainstream media and political establishment have decided that they just essentially tore out the mechanism in this car that tracks us to the right. So we're basically just a left-going vehicle at this stage, and there's no way that any of their ideas are going to work. So it's incredibly hard for me to imagine realistically what's going to happen, because it seems that something fundamentally needs to realign itself before the future becomes even a little bit conceivable.
Yeah, no, you guys, I think sort of the key problem here is, as you say, is creating the activist class. So in here in sort of where I am in South Africa and with Afro Forum, like I was talking about, they had an advantage which we don't have. So they had the old Afrikaner elite to sort of help sort of bankroll everything and organize it, and they were trying to preserve already existing values and not sort of they weren't sort of starting from scratch. We don't really have that luxury as far as I can see. So what we are trying to do to get off the ground is going to be a lot of work, for the simple fact that, we're on our own to a large extent. Now, this could just be ignorance on my part. Maybe there are some Texas billionaires with some right-wing ideas who are just waiting for the right cause to throw money behind. I don't know. But it seems to me that in terms of coalition building, this doesn't really answer the activist problem, but in terms of coalition building, winning begets winning in a certain sense. So if we are able to sort of get off the ground and start building something compelling, the leftists still hate it, but I think a lot of people who are just sort of disillusioned, they will be attracted to that. And ultimately, we might not be able to sort of dominate the discussion, but we may hopefully be able to forge ourselves into a big enough chunk which is undigestible, and the government will just sort of have to deal with us perpetually. But getting the first step, sort of building something, creating the activist class, that's the necessary ingredient, which I think is sort of missing here. And this is just me spitballing ideas, but one of the things I thought about, and I think it could be done in a sort of more decentralized way, is just sort of a small baby step, is if we sort of created our own just sort of what did I call it? I called it the Western Endowment for the Humanities, right? So we sort of network, we get a bunch of people who have these existing audiences, everyone chips in like $2, and then we just sort of use that as a pool by which we could sort of push our stuff, whether it's creating art, whether it's sort of creating our own, bigger, better content or whatever. I'm not exactly sure, but it would seem to me that just as a practicality, that's, something that could happen. And then hopefully once you have something like that, it would be easier to get on the radar of potentially bigger players who might not otherwise know about you.
I think that we have to start earlier than that. What's missing for that project is trust networks. And trust networks need to be built in real life. I'm going to be more open-minded. I think that if we got something like Discord up and we kept it going and we really, really policed it for 5 years, you might be able to get enough trust to get a trust network in place. The problem with raising money, apropos of having someplace trustworthy to put it, is that it's very difficult for it not to just turn into a grift, right? Because it becomes an unaccountable corporation really, really quickly. So as I see it, hello?
Yeah, we
hear you.
Sorry, my power flickered there for a second. So as I see it, the pathway is first see if we can get together groups of people for the purposes of talks, discussions of ideas, appreciation of art. Then once you have a lot of solid relationships among reliable people who are dedicated, then I think that's the kind of apparatus you might want to install your Western endowment kind of thing into. But before you have that network, I mean, you start throwing money around, the grifters from the internet are going to come in and stick their beaks into it. And then you're going to get more fiascos on your hand than you are, than you are going to get anything done that's big.
No, I think you bring up some interesting, potential problems. I don't deny those are high likelihoods, but if we think about it, and sort of what I was going back to earlier about the purpose of, or one of the benefits of the current existing technologies that we're being used to sort of network and stuff, I would say to a large extent, these networks and these communities have already been built up to a large extent. So, there are certain players in our sphere, Academic Agent, Settler, you, Auron, Morgoth, people whose integrity I think is it's safe to say they have some is sort of what I'm getting at. And if you're able to sort of
maybe the people other than me that you listed.
Yeah. Yes. But if you're able to sort of form some sort of organized coalition of this, I mean, and just get all the, I mean, the viewers are already there, the audience is already there. Now we just have to mobilize it and sort of make it activist. And
sure.
And of course having some sort of organized, organizing something like this is complicated, and having a of course I am. I'm not even at 1,000 subs yet, Lambda. But hopefully that'll change.
I don't know why you're pronouncing his name wrong.
Yeah, Lambuda. Sorry. But having sort of, creating a board and sort of all that sort of stuff, and sort of a chairman and all that, those are all practicalities which will have to be addressed. But I do think something along those lines could be done if, we had sort of the will to do it, essentially.
I mean, I like that. First of all, I one caveat is I think you need a lot more trust before you even think about doing activism, right? And for me, my dream is an intellectual group that produces culture and intellectual output, and that will inspire activism, but that will not directly participate in activism.
Funded by the Western Endowment for the Humanities, of course.
Well, we'll have to see. I mean, if you see things like the American First Movement with Nick Fuentes, I mean, I now want to put the guy down because he stuck his neck out a lot more than I ever have. And I don't know if I have standing to put him down, but he does prefigure a lot of the challenges that erupt. Now, I'm not going to say who's wrong on anything, right, on any of these little fiascos they've experienced, but aside from social media censorship, which is absolutely not their fault, in Nick Fuentes' group, there's been a large number of backstabbing and betrayals and accusations and counter-accusations of grifters, grifting and taking money and doing stuff like that. And that just demonstrates, how much trust you need to have, right? Because whereas the left wing, it largely organizes itself through established institutions that have people who professionally do it. Whenever you organize something at the small level we have right now, you're going through the hands of people who aren't professional. And so a lot of these due diligence things that keep people in line are not in place. And this leads to a lot of situations where there's an appearance of grifting or fraud. And this is sort of my current working theory, is that this leads a lot of people to go like, oh, so-and-so must be a grifter. And you get this situation that's all too common on the right, where everyone denounces everyone else, and then the whole thing kind of collapses. That seems to be, I'm not saying this has ended America First or anything like that, but that has happened multiple times in America First. And it seems to happen everywhere where there's not some kind of establishment, everywhere where it's not, it's organized first online and then second offline.
Yeah, autism.
It's always the problem.
Sorry, what was it?
Oh, I highlighted a comment. Autism is the problem.
That's not entirely incorrect.
Yeah. But yeah, it's no. I mean, I'm sort of joking, but yeah, it is a sort of inexperienced, sort of people not really understanding this stuff very well. All those things really contribute, and on the topic of grifting, we have one more super chat for $2. Progs are heretics of Christianity. Must reach out. I mean, the first part of that sentence is definitely true. And I don't know. I don't want progressives to go to hell for all eternity for their heresy. So I guess that makes the second part of the sentence also true. But yeah, that's about that. So yeah, I don't know what else. Does anyone have anything else to say?
I mean, I could talk about this stuff all day, but nothing particular at this moment.
Okay.
We could talk about bluegrass. I understand Dave's a
Oh
fan.
yeah. Well,
So-
it's been ages since I've been in the scene, but well, I think that was a joke.
Oh no, I love bluegrass, but
We had a disagreement over Mumford and Sons, which is not bluegrass.
it's not
but-
bluegrass. It's not bluegrass.
Yeah, but
it's a gateway drug, but it's not.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, but there was part of the whole late 2000s sort of like indie folk kind of revival scene.
Yeah, I'm just gonna hijack Settler's stream and talk about bluegrass until he kicks me. But no,
It's better than anime, right?
Yes, dear
Yes.
God, yes. Steel drivers. Are we familiar with the steel drivers at all?
Yeah.
So do they qualify as bluegrass? Are they too mainstream to be bluegrass?
Well, I mean, I guess I don't know if they go to the festival. It's kind of the cutoff point for me, right?
Yeah, well, so the lead singer was Chris Stapleton, and he's become a big country star now in his own right. So I didn't know if that's now declassifies. Sorry,
Well,
I don't actually mean to hijack his stream, but now I'm just curious.
I'm not really a purity enforcer. I like all this artsy shit, like like Chris Thiele and Punch Brothers and stuff like that. That's not bluegrass by any standard definition, but it's called that, right?
Yeah, I was left out of the bluegrass scene in the mid-late 2000s. To me, what was cool then was metal. So I was into all the different subgenres of metal. So I don't have much to contribute to bluegrass, unfortunately.
Well, I like a lot of Iron Maiden and bluegrass. Do with that what you will.
Oh, nice. So harmonized bluegrass with at 200 beats per minute. There we go.
The best thing I've ever seen is the Trooper done by Bluegrass Band.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, unfortunately, my knowledge of bluegrass is also extremely limited. So I don't really have anything to add to that. I guess we do have another super chat. Caesar, Mr. House, yes man, who is the best for the future of the Mojave? I suppose it's quite telling what your opinion on that, since you didn't even include the NCR. When I was a neocon, this is a video game question. If everyone has not figured that out,
It's New Vegas, I believe, right?
Yeah.
That's an old video game.
I mean, it's still really popular among that sort of community. It's I think 2010. Yeah, it was just not that long before Skyrim came out. That's why New Vegas is such a famously rushed game, is because they wanted it to get out let's say significant amount of time before Skyrim, because they want it to be taking any of the headlines away from that. Yeah, I mean, when I was a neocon, I definitely was a pretty big fan of the NCR. Their sort of basic stories. They're supposed to be like a corrupt republic. They're pretty much supposed to be the American republic in like the Gilded Age. And yeah, I was I mean, I understood there were problems with them, but I was a pretty big NCR supporter. I know a lot of people say that Mr. House is supposed to be the NRX option, and I actually did a playthrough somewhat recently, like probably 6 months ago, to sort of experience that firsthand, and I didn't really, I don't know, I wasn't too impressed by Mr. House. Caesar is obviously just comically evil, even if he's sort of an interesting character. It's there's just there's not much of a way to justify the constant crucifying of people.
I know a way of segueing this onto an interesting phenomenon. That was one of the last video games I ever played, and I felt that this was the first. Who is that girl from the Guild? The redhead.
Felicia Day.
Felicia Day, yeah. She did some of the voice acting in it, and her politics are obviously well-known left. And that was where I first started to see this sort of like political infiltration. The first Fallout game, or I should say the third one, right? The first of the 3D Fallout games was sort of a transparently non-political thing. And, in fact, I kind of like the politics of New Vegas. But just to get to your point on Caesar's Legion and all this stuff, it was also the beginning of where I'm like, well, you're being directed to like this group, and you're being directed to like dislike this other group. So it's sort of like this weird, phony politics on rails, and that really put me off. And I kind of since New Vegas, I've been kind of on the lookout for these kind of like choice but not choice type things. Like, and this has been sort of an increasing feature of progressive art, is that they don't want you to make counter progressive decisions, and so they'll hold your hand and kind of guide you to the correct answer, because by making all the other choices just so unpalatable.
So one of the things is, do they even know how to write storylines that allow you to make non-progressive choices in that seem appealing, right?
Well,
like
at least in New Vegas they did, right? Like Caesar is actually a non-progressive choice.
Yeah,
but he's like the villains from Dune, basically. I mean, like he's uninterestingly evil, right?
Yeah, but that's what I mean. And this is one of my favorite games of all time. And by the way, I've always found the factions outside of the main storyline more interesting. Like, I think the Elvis gang and the Boomers are far more hilarious than anything that's happening in the main storyline. But what I'm kind of driving at it here is, do they even know how to write a non-progressive ending that could appeal to people generally? Like, do they even know how to do that? Because I think they only know how to portray those positions as cartoonishly evil. I don't know that they have the ability to even write those as something that could appeal to the average person, because they don't see why anyone would ever make those choices.
Oh, I think they see that they would be appealing. I think they're taken out. I think that, I don't know. I haven't played AAA video games in a really long time, but I suspect that if you give people the option of being Caesar's Legion, but kind of based, that seems to be almost what all gamers really want, right?
So the goal is right-wing video games.
Well, that's an interesting question in and of itself. And, I don't know. I don't consider video games to be a very right-wing genre. Unfortunately, I think video games have like an inherently left-wing bias to them because they're so accessible. And they're kind of wish gratification, which is a very, very left-wing thing. I think that other games, esports have more of a right-wing component to them, right? But immersive role-playing, I have a hard time seeing how that genre could be right-wing, because the nature of what it is, this seems very, very left-wing to me.
Yeah, mostly I just played a bunch of RTS games, so
real-time, that's enough. I wouldn't be surprised if like half. I wouldn't be surprised if like half of a lot of the late onset gender dysphoria cases that we see in the West these days are like people learning a specific kind of identity-based instant gratification they get from porn and role-playing games, and then wanting to bring that into reality physically. Like, it literally is the instinct of trying to make anime real.
Whoever's commenting,
I'm just saying, right? I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case.
I wouldn't be either.
Whoever's commenting as Dennis Prager, I need you to really lean into that and show up to like all the streams and just like completely inhabit that role. Like, if Dennis Prager was just sitting at all the reactionary streams and commenting, that'd be amazing.
Is this the equivalent of Curtis Yarvin's Diamond Joe idea, where neo-reactionaries construct like a conspiracy theory by which, like, QAnon or some QAnon-like figure is sitting behind Joe as like this based Burt Reynolds character, and we just kind of meme that reality into existence.
One can hope.
And since we're on the topic, quick answer for this unpaid question: definitely the Nords. Both when I was in Neocon and now, I still think the Nords are the safe answer for Skyrim.
Is this for Skyrim? My wife plays Skyrim. She always plays Imperials. I don't even know what that means. I just know that she says that.
But yeah, a couple more super chats. Zero Kev for $5. I know Dave mentioned how the right needs artists. What do you all think of the band Rome? Never heard of them.
Never heard of them. What kind of genre do they play?
I've heard of them, but it was years ago. I think they're I think they were kind of like an indie rock band, I believe.
Yeah, kind of one piece of advice though for any right winger. We all know Philosophat, and I like her Julia Savola stuff. But if you have a band, please don't name it something like Uber Folk. I mean, come on.
Uber Folk. That's
Uber
funny.
Folk.
That reminds me. That reminds me. I was thinking of yesterday. I was hearing about music that was made during the Yugoslav wars, and apparently there was a real shitty subgenre of music that came out of the Balkans then called turbo folk. So it was it's like imagine the worst like MIDI sampled electronic instruments played at fast tempos with like bad Serbian singing. It was atrocious.
Zero Kev says it's neo folk. I don't really know what neo folk means, but I mean I know what folk music is obviously, but I don't really know what the neo part of that is. I don't know. I mean I enjoy folk music, I guess. I mean my channel is named after a folk song, Scarborough Settler's Lament. And that's an old Canadian folk song, but the sort of most popular a rendition of that comes from the relatively well-known Canadian folk singer Stan Rogers, who died in the 1980s, I think.
Sooner or later, the left will cancel folk.
Yeah.
And we all know this, right? Like
music's
they're going to do it. They're going to do it. And I think that the right can make some hay from that. Just saying, I know I'm biased here. But they're going to do it eventually. Sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm pretty sure Stan Rogers was a lefty. I mean, you would just expect anyone in the entertainment industry to be a lefty, but from some of his songs,
and to be honest, the bluegrass scene is just inundated with the performers are all left wing, right?
Yeah,
but
that seems to be pretty universal across all music performers. Like in university, I was just in like a small little local rock band, and we'd play at bars and stuff, and like basically virtually everybody except for me was just like the worst kind of leftist.
Yeah, but yes, like some of like Stan Rogers had a couple of songs that seemed pretty lefty, but most of his songs are like just sort of like patriotic Canadian things, and not in like the weird way, and not in like the like outright patriotic way that like people often think from sort of like bad American renditions of patriotism, but they just talk about like Canadian history and stuff. And they're very good, and I can't imagine like modern day lefties making songs like he made, even if he was a lefty.
I mean, you guys got that "Take the Northwest Passage" song, right? That's Canadian.
Yeah, that's him.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, and Barrett's "Privateers" is his other really famous one, but he had like 5 albums before he died. He died in like a runway accident on a plane. But yeah, Darth Kilhoun for $5. We need intentionally right-wing anime that the leftist weebs would ironically love. Commit Sudoku and their large.
I feel like I've answered this question so many times. It's almost become something that I say, like, if they make a doll of me and you pull the cord, I'll probably say this, right? But like, that is anime. When anime, at least the anime they had in the 90s, like, something like Last Exile or anything from Hayao Miyazaki, like they portray like this based European Victorian turbo right-wing reality, and everyone who watches it is like so into the aesthetics of the right wing. That's half of the aesthetics the anime sells is the aesthetics of the right wing, and then almost nobody internalizes this aesthetics into an actual moralistically right-wing perspective.
Does this mean that 40K is like the more based anime then? Like you're seeding the right wing?
I hate to say it, but that's a distinct possibility.
Yeah,
because people actually get it. Yeah,
I mean, I think this needs maybe. I don't know if this is the discussion that Settlers Lament wants to have on this stream.
I don't care.
But if there needs to be a discussion about basically how right-wing aesthetics can be so easily co-opted by the left. I mean, maybe not. Maybe I shouldn't say so easily, but I mean, certainly in terms of anime.
I think they have.
Why do you think that is the case, Dave?
Well, with anime more than 40K, because anime is a zero barrier to entry field, and superficially looking like something, but not being that thing is what leftism is all about, right? And if you look at what anime is, anime's pretension to be based in Victorian is totally superficial, because the creators that make it aren't Christian, and like half of them have Christian themes, and the creators are never Christian. They don't live Christian lives. They're not concerned about the philosophical questions that they bring up in their own anime. They don't struggle with the trying to create a society that they portray in the anime. So the aesthetics is completely phony. And so what comes down eventually, if you get deep enough into anime, is this idea that watching and appearing to be something is the end all and be all of that thing, which is exactly, I mean, that's what I've understood from art. And this is why I think romanticism fails, is that art is an act of doing something and struggling with something. So religious pieces of art are supposed to inspire in you a religious experience, a contemplation, a confession of some type. And a good example of this, if anyone's read Peter Hitchens' Rage Against God, he has how he had a religious experience looking at Peter van der Weiden's Last Judgment, which is an excellent picture. But that is the intended emotional interaction with that painting. So the problem with romanticism and the problem with anime is that it does not actually encourage the viewer to take from it the same kind of emotions that the characters are portraying inside the anime, or the same kind of feelings that the characters are portraying inside the anime. In many ways, the exact opposite. So the anime itself, in that regard, becomes a simulacrum, and the real thing that anime people learn, the real discipline they learn, is the idea that if you can represent it, then you are that thing, which is why transgenderism and cosplay, which are near cousins of each other, are both more prolific than people becoming Christians and conservatives, even though basically that's what anime portrays, right? Was that too long of an answer?
No, that makes sense.
I was just gonna say, the thing with anime is I hear you. There's a lot of it which is we could say based, but part of the problem too is there's also a lot of this weird effeminate androgynous sort of anime as well, which I don't think is particularly what we're looking for. So
you know what the worst perpetrator of that is? Do you know the anime creator that perpetrates that idea the worst?
Nah.
Hayao Miyazaki. Absolutely.
Oh yeah. Oh no. Yeah.
So much so. I mean, I rewatched
like in Howl's Moving Castle.
Howl's Moving Castle is a great example of that, right?
Yeah,
like the main character starts off as a villain, and like when you first encounter him, he's like this big hulking guy, and by the end, he supposedly has undergone no transformation, but by the end, he's like a 13-year-old boy.
Yeah, no, and he just looks effeminate and just weird and stuff. And I actually enjoy Howl's Moving Castle like as a movie, but I'm just looking at the aesthetics of the dudes, and I'm like, I mean, like why are they drawn like this?
No, but
what's the purpose?
The Howl's Moving Castle is it. What makes it so interesting is that the main character actually is drawn very masculinely in the first scene he appears in. And he progressively gets less masculine over the course of the movie, which underlines the exact effect that you're talking about.
Okay.
Which is really weird when you think about it, right?
So it's not just me. Okay.
No, I mean, rewatch the anime. I rewatched it with my wife a few weeks ago when we were on vacation. I didn't misremember this. He literally, and it's not like this is part of the plot. It's not like this was intended. This appears to be just a subconscious, Miyazaki thing. He portrayed his own main character as more and more effeminate as the main character became more and more sympathetic.
Weird.
I feel like it's unfair to be attacking anime without Fritz here to defend it.
Oh, yeah. And let me tell you about Nier Automaton. I never played that game, but I'm just.
No, I only ever watched like a handful of animes. I am by no means a weeb.
Yeah, I
I'm
see you
just,
down. I see you
peripherally
down.
aware.
No, I see you down there, Zodiac. Yeah, you guys have missed the bluegrass now. Yeah, it was all bluegrass when but now.
Well, hey, but you have to admit, like, bashing bluegrass is not nearly as fun as bashing anime.
But bluegrass is good though.
But it's harder to trigger bluegrass fans. What are you supposed to say? Like,
well, because all three of us can get in a room and
yeah.
Okay, Zodiac Priest, I would love to hear all you talk about education at some point. This is something I totally forgot about, but I was actually planning on bringing up at some point during this stream, was education and homeschooling, that type of stuff. So does anyone have anything they want to say on that?
No, other than I'd be down to talk about it at some point. I taught in schools, and I am a product of homeschooling myself. So yeah, this is something that I enjoy discussing.
Yeah, I mean, flee public education. Do it if you can in any way, shape, or form. There's no saving it. The entire edifice is degenerate and will crumble, and there is absolutely no way for it to be saved in any way, shape, or form. So if you can get out, get out. I think that's going to be one of the defining features of people going forward, is who is able to escape the public education system.
Yeah, and I mean, I can sympathize that for a lot of people, it is just not financially possible to homeschool your children. So if that's the case, you may have to figure out some other arrangement. But at the very least, you really need to make sure that you educate your children in like traditional values and Christianity and whatever as much as you can. I know way too many people. Like too many, I'm still on the younger side, so it's not like I know many people my age that have like grown up children, or I don't know anyone my age that have grown up children, because that's not really possible at my age. But I know like older people in Christian communities that that like that they've had children, they've grown up where they're like teenagers or whatever now, and they're like complete progressives, atheists, liberals, whatever, and they're just shocked. They're like, oh, we went to church every week. Like, how did this happen? And it happened because going to church every week isn't going to make someone stick to these values.
But here's the question: what is, right?
Yeah, I know. Well, as intensive education into this as much as possible, I guess. I mean, I'm no expert.
I have a different response, and I'm somebody who considers himself an educator, and I hope I'm not hijacking your stream, because I tend to blab
no
a
worries.
lot. It's and we should say, first of all, just to not be black-pilled here, even though the experience of having your kids progressivized is a common one, statistically, people tend to follow their parents, right? So that's not the main effect, right?
That's true.
So like, we can calm down there, but it's still really bad when it happens, because every person, I mean, from a Machiavellian point of view, every person really counts, because we're a minority. People did studies on this, and it's peer group. Peer group matters more than education, because you're trying to get through this period. The period you're trying to get through is like basically the end of your institutional education to when you have a job and a family. That's when the left makes its money in terms of converting conservatives. So, if you go to like a Christian college, or if you have like institutional support in college, like a really good Newman Center, once you leave that, right, and you go from like 22 to whenever you get married, that's sort of the devil's playground, and that's like 100% peer group. And the left understood that that's most people who change their opinions in that little space. And it's also the area of space where conservatives have almost no influence, or counter progressives have almost no influence.
Yeah, that's a really good point. But I mean, just overall, you need to do as much as you can to sort of encourage your children's future to turn out as conservative as possible, as religious as possible. I like that they otherwise there's a good chance they will go the other way. But some other super chats. I can't highlight these ones; they're too far back. But Bolderio 393 for $5 RS. Don't really know what that means. I'll assume that's just gibberish. But thank you very much for the $5. And another one for Australia, $5. I'm doing a film production degree in Australia right now, keeping my head down and holding my tongue. There are socialists everywhere. Yeah, I mean that's what you should expect from university, from film school. I don't really have much to say. I mean, in education, having both taken the like keep your head down route and the like be edgy and conservative route, I would definitely recommend just keeping your head down. Just like find people that think the same way as you do, that you can like vent and talk about this stuff. But it's really just not worth it to try and contradict people. You're not really going to convince anyone. It's actually you made a really good video on this, Dave. Sort of my favorite thing to do in education was to just sort of concern troll them from the left. One of my favorite. Too. Yeah. One of my favorite phrases that I used all the time was bourgeois feminism. And just stuff like that to try and point out the contradictions in their own beliefs from the left.
Or just like, I don't know, I'm not convinced. This doesn't seem to fit together.
Oh, what?
Just acting like a general skeptic is just really good, because they really, if they come after you and really try to proselytize, oftentimes they can't do that, and you're able to inject doubt into the situation without necessarily exposing yourself to ridicule or criticism.
Yeah. But yeah. So that's all I really have to say to that tweet, or to that message. Lord Kelvin for $2. Embrace the Bossa Novia pill. I have no idea what that means.
Bossa Nova.
Yeah, Bossa Nova, settler. Jeez, man.
Okay,
it's when you're hanging out with Lambuda and he really turns that up, gets you moving.
No idea what that means.
Canadians, man, what are you gonna do?
Canucks.
But
Sam
Sam
doesn't have slavery. They don't have Bossa Nova.
But is that type of music or?
Yes.
Yeah, it's a Brazilian type of music, right?
Okay.
I can tell you've never seen a late 80s, early 90s Casio keyboard, because every one of them had a button to automatically play a Bossa Nova beat synthetically, and it was the most horribly cheesy thing you've ever seen.
Okay. Sam153 for $5. Opinions on synthwave and electro swing. I mean, I'm at least vaguely aware of those things, but I don't really have strong opinions on them.
I mean, I think synthwave, the right has this tendency of catching things on their way out. I think synthwave is on its way out. I think that the problem is it just emphasizes the very things that I think aren't really the right's wheelhouse. The right's wheelhouse is sincerity and history, and synthwave kind of brings it back, but in a kitschy way. I don't know. I think it's good. I like it, but. Yeah, sorry, that's all I had to say.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I agree. I was just laughing at Charlemagne's thing.
Yeah. 21st reaction for $2 with homeschooling is way cheaper. Do it now or else. I mean, what I meant by homeschooling being expensive is not everyone is able to afford to have the wife or the husband, whichever, usually the wife, stay home and do homeschooling. It's just, I mean, with that said, a lot of people complain about not being able to afford these things, when, perhaps they probably could if they were willing to make sacrifices. and they're just not willing to make those sacrifices. But for a lot of people, like if you live in a major urban center, it may very well just not be possible to survive on one income.
Yeah.
I think we do have to understand that for some people this is just not an option. But Zero Kev for another $5. What's up with flat vector design? I see it everywhere, from BLM activists to gas company commercials. Is it the art style of? I don't really like that term. I find it really vulgar. But is it the art style of global homogeneity propaganda?
Was he using the word Bugman?
No. I mean, you see it on screen right now.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, he's talking about the sort of woke art design.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But I don't know, flat vector design. I have no idea what that is. I'm sure I'd recognize it if it's so common, but I have no idea.
It was an aesthetic that became popular like about 10 years ago. I don't know. I think it's just a millennial thing.
Yeah.
We'll look back on that like the lime green refrigerators for the silent generation.
Hope so.
Okay, yeah, just like the corporate, like YouTube art stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I just assume this is a good part of the left wing's hatred for beauty. I don't know if it goes much deeper than that.
Yeah, they abandon all good aesthetics. I make sure to use it whenever I discuss something terrible from the left, just to display its ugliness.
Yeah. And last super chat for now, at least. Is lo-fi good? I don't know. I've never really. I mean, I've gotten those recommendations for lo-fi YouTube videos a million times. I've never really watched them more than for a few minutes.
I like it, but it's boring. I mean, the problem with these electrical genres, in my opinion, is that they're kind of like they just played to the left's strength. They're low investment, they're not sincere, and they all sound the same, and they're not very participatory. So it's kind of like porn in video games. Like if these porn is just sinful, so don't even bother trying to make a
right-wing pornography,
right? But right wing video games are hypothetically something you could make. But in my opinion, at least with video games as they exist currently, and that's a big caveat, video games as they exist currently are low investment mousetraps to catch your own attention and to hold you in an artificial world and to convince you that the image of something is the equivalent of that thing itself. All things that really are part of the left's worldview more than the right one. And again, I really like lo-fi. I like putting it on the background when I'm doing coding. It's great. And I really, really love those lo-fi channels. But I really think that any art form, for it to be really, really exciting for me, has to be something that grabs the entirety of your intelligence, that's more engaging. And lo-fi has this kind of trad quality to it, but it's very much the kind of like, let's stand back and appreciate this thing like a postcard rather than let's participate in it. And if there's one thing that anime has taught me, it's that in order for me to trust an art form, that art form has to be encouraging a participation that exhibits the morality and not simply just the imagistics that can be passively consumed as traditionalism.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Because fundamentally for me, like lo-fi, synthwave, all this sort of stuff is background music, right? So like just before I came on the show, I was writing the script for my next Machiavelli video, and I just had it on in the background. And why was I listening to that instead of, something else? It's because I could kind of tune it out and it's just there. Right? So it's not like, listening to an audiobook. I can't listen to a good or new audiobook while writing at the same time because I'm too interested in what's going on there. In the same way that, if I get a new album from a band that I really like, I can't just sort of have it on in the background either because I'm focused on what they're doing. So yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, it's chewing gum for the brain. Like it's not really it's not gonna get you moving into direction.
That being said, there are elements of lo-fi music that I do appreciate. I do appreciate its contemplative nature. I just, imagine sitting down for a lo-fi concert in a concert hall. Like, yeah, I'm going to do 2 hours and I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to fold my hands. And like this maestro of lo-fi music is going to like bring me to a new spiritual elevation by playing lo-fi music. I think most people would shoot themselves if they were going to do that, right?
But that fall asleep.
Yeah, or we'd fall asleep, right? You'd be paying $80 for a sleep. That being said, the sort of wistful contemplative nature reminds me of minimalism, and early minimalism and early abstract forms from the early 20th century. I know I'm going against a lot of other right-wingers. I really appreciate them because they do kind of allude to this great unconscious spirituality that we can tap into. But I'm telling you, man, there's just so much more. And anything that really goes for the jugular and tries to capture that subconscious spirituality is going to have to be a little bit more disruptive than easy listening music, than elevator music for me to complete like a video project too.
We can't ride Kenny G into the revolution.
Yeah. The revolution will not be set to easy play jazz.
So
disappointing. The revolution will not be Wonder Bread.
I guess on the topic of synthwave, I put out a couple weeks ago that video Like a Cancer, which was a clip from Matt Fradd on pornography. And I saw several people, both in the comments and on my Discord, saying that video inspired them to try and quit porn. So that's pretty white pilling guts. That's the best usage of synthwave I've seen, I suppose.
Yeah, pornography is the demonstration that there really are forms of media art that are irredeemable and just need to be expunged. I think that's probably, that might be the exception rather than the rule, but there are forms of media consumption that we need to get rid of as a species and never go back to again. Internet pornography is one of those things. And I wouldn't imagine some forms of video games would also fall into that category, although I would imagine there's a way you can do video games right. We haven't quite gotten there yet. We need some kind of genius to get us there.
Have you guys ever seen that really old sci-fi show Sliders?
Oh yeah. Well, I saw an episode in the 90s when I was like 7.
Yeah. So it's super cheesy, but I was big in cheesy sci-fi, so I loved it. But there's an episode where the premise is they like travel to all these alternate universes and they can't control when they go and whatnot. It's quantum leap, but instead of history, you're just going to alternate universes. And one of them, they end up in this situation where they're piloting mechs and like the whole world is being destroyed by these like 2 mechs. And they eventually find out that it's 2 humans playing video games, and actually they're the last 2 humans on Earth. It's a man and a woman. And they've completely forgotten that these were actual like machines of war, and that anything existed outside of these video game units. And so even when like they get these 2 people together to like, hey, you guys kind of have to repopulate the world, like they don't know how to interact because all they know how to do is pilot the mechs. Like even when they're next to each other, like they don't even look at each other. They just both load back in and like work together to go blow up other things. So yeah, I think there's probably something as bad as that sci-fi world
pretty
is.
Eerily prophetic.
Yeah, it's not.
Was that the show with John Rhys Davis in it?
Yeah, it is.
Oh,
yeah, Gimli, and it's got Jerry O'Connell.
Okay.
So it's peak early 90s. But it's not a show that it's not Black Mirror, but that particular episode's got something to it.
Settler, I have to go now, but it's been a pleasure being on. I hope I didn't bore your audience too much. Okay.
No, it's good, man.
Thank you very much for joining.
I think I'm ready to wrap too.
Right.
I just looked at the time. It's about 3 a.m. here. See ya.
Okay. Yeah. Everyone, make sure to check out everyone's channels here. They're all linked in the description. Everyone has a channel, so subscribe if you're not already subscribed to everyone. And yeah, I mean that's basically it. Thanks for joining us. Stop viewing pornography. Stop wasting your time on video games and social media. Anyone have anything else to say?
Nope.
No,
Thanks for having us on, man.
agreed. Sounds good. Yes, like our stuff, subscribe, get me over the 1,000 mark, and I'll be very happy.
Yeah. Okay, thanks everyone. And join my, stop wasting time on social media, but join my Discord and follow me on Twitter. But no, social media really is a cancer. It's something I've been trying to cut out a bit more recently. And I'm sure this isn't anything anyone hasn't already heard. But it is something I think a lot of people have issues with, and just trying to encourage people in whatever little way I can to sort of cut it out if it needs to be. But yeah, thank you everyone for joining us. Goodbye.